He was called a dictator, a visionary, an anti Semite, a modernizer, a champion of the developing world. For 22 years, one man's will was so intertwined with a nation's destiny that it became impossible to separate the two. Today, he turns 100 years old. So, how do you even begin to understand a figure like Dr. Mahathir Mohamad? For decades, the world has tried to define him. In 2011, in typical fashion, he decided to do it for them. He published his autobiography, A Doctor in the House. You're watching Explaining Malaysia, a video essay YouTube project to explore the soul of Malaysia through primary sources. I'm your host, Mr. Kuala Lumpur. Let me tell you this: A Doctor in the House isn't just a memoir, it's a diagnosis of a nation, of his own people, and of himself. The prose is clinical, the observations are often brutal and built from problematic views, and the voice is one of absolute, unshakable conviction. Reading it feels less like reading a politician's tale and more like sitting across from a surgeon who is about to explain with surgical precision exactly what is wrong with the patient and what he intends to do about it. Despite its lack of literary style, it's honestly a pretty decent read from a man who rarely minces his words. It's my second favorite Malaysian politician memoir of all time. To understand modern Malaysia, you have to understand the mind that built it. And that mind is laid bare right here in these pages. The voice that carries the narration of this book is the voice of an outsider. Mahathir hammers this point home from the very first page. He wasn't royalty. He wasn't a London trained lawyer like his predecessors. He was a doctor, a commoner. The odds had always been stacked heavily against me. I did not come from the Malay ruling elite. Malays were then still feudalistic and not at all used to commoners rising above their station. But I broke the mold and paved the way for them to head the government of Malaysia. The outsider, the polka dot boy, the detached observer becomes a participant in one of history's great dramas, the end of the British Empire. He writes about being an Anglophile, a boy who believed in the invincibility of the Orang Putih, the white man, the colonizer. And then he describes watching them retreat in the face of the Japanese invasion in 1942, as Malaya gets whirled into World War II. The prose here isn't just analytical, it's a testimony of a profound psychological break. You can feel the foundations of his world cracking. It was a shock for me to see the Orang Putih being defeated, and by Asians at that. The white man was not as invincible as I had thought. Deep down inside me, a new feeling stirred. I became more conscious of my origins, my Malayness. I began to resent the dishonor and the humiliation of my people and my country. That resentment, that newfound Malay nationalism, becomes the driving force of the rest of the book, reflected in the rest of his life. It's a raw, honest admission of a feeling that many in the post colonial world would recognize, but few leaders would articulate so bluntly. Mahathir's political journey was never smooth. He was a rebel, and his memoir doesn't shy away from this. He details his expulsion from the ruling party in 1969 after he sent a blistering letter criticizing the nation's founding father. Most political careers would end there. But for Mahathir, the wilderness became his laboratory. It was here that he wrote his most important and most forbidden work, The Malay Dilemma. In many ways, this was the book that built him, and the book that has always been most honest about his true beliefs. To this day, there's almost no thesis within the Malay Dilemma that Dr. Mahathir has evolved from. The book was and is political dynamite. Banned for years, it's a brutal diagnosis of what he saw as the sickness of his own community. More so than his memoir, the prose is cold, analytical. It reads less like a political manifesto and more like a surgeon's notes before a high stakes operation. He asks, why are the Malays poor and left behind? And his answer is incredibly provocative. I blamed hereditary factors, poor educational facilities, inbreeding, chronic endemic diseases, colonial government policies and practices for the poor performance of the Malays. They like the easy way out and failed to rise above challenges. This is the core of his worldview. the unflinching belief that culture and values inherently determine a people's destiny. And in the book, you can see him wrestling with the cure, a massive affirmative action policy. But what's fascinating is how, even as he prescribes the medicine, he foresees the side effects. The NEP can make the users so dependent that their inherent capability regresses. If we continue with it, we risk making the Malays a permanently dependent people. This is a malignant fate. With these words, you can see the internal journey of a man grappling with these immense nation defining contradictions. Some would, perhaps rightly, say he should have never been allowed to further these ideas. But it was exactly this kind of thinking that brought him back from the political dead. Tun Abdul Razak, Malaysia's second prime minister, saw the value in this outcast's brutal honesty. He brought him back from political exile, and within years, in 1981, Dr. Mahathir became prime minister. The doctor was finally in charge of the patient. If you enjoyed this video and want to support Explaining Malaysia, please subscribe and consider joining my Substack. It's all for free, but you can pay what you'd like if you'd like, and you'd get transcripts of every episode as well as weekly recommendations of books, articles, and other primary texts I'm reading. We also have a Ko-fi for tips. Thank you very much. Link in description. The bulk of the memoir covers his 22 years in power, and the voice shifts again. It's no longer just the diagnostician, it's the chief executive, the commander, justifying his decisions. He writes about his grand projects, the National Car, the Twin Towers, not as extravagances, but as psychological tools. It's where decades of self-reflection have diverged him from the view of millions of Malaysians. Dr. Mahathir saw these as a cure for the national inferiority complex, a way to give Malaysians a soapbox to stand on. His writing on this is defiant, almost a challenge to his critics. He even claims, people must remember that property appreciates in value. If we ever wanted to, we could sell the towers and make a handsome profit. But it's his account of the most difficult moments that are the most revealing. On Ops Lalang, the mass arrests of political opponents in 1987 that almost sparked race riots anew for the first time since the trauma of 1969, we see him accepting responsibility while justifying it with the immense pressure he was under. He presents himself not as a tyrant, but as a leader making an impossible choice. For someone reading more critically, though, it is hard not to question whether such a framing is genuine, especially when he writes, I never favored using the ISA. I could not countermand police orders. I also had to accept responsibility. No doubt Ops Lalang proved a black mark in the administrative history of Malaysia. Then there's the Anwa Ibrahim issue. This is where the book becomes a raw, personal, and deeply partisan document. Reading these chapters feels like watching a man meticulously build his case for history. In the 1990s, Malaysia's story felt like the story of the dominant, unbending father and the brilliant son and heir eager to ascend. Mahathir and Anwar and Mahathir. It is arguably the unavoidable defining story of Malaysia of the last 30 years. Even today, with Anwar finally as Prime Minister, his rise was contingent on the electoral miracle of 2018, which was deeply dependent on Dr. Mahathir. Even today, Anwar's most outspoken opponent is Dr. Mahathir. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The book was published in 2011, so the Mahathir who wrote this would never have imagined the seemingly impossible events that far down the future. He details every meeting, every allegation of the sodomy and corruption trials that brought down his deputy. Remember, it is not an objective account. It is Mahathir's truth, and he presents it with the force of a final, unappealable judgment. I simply could not have a person of such dubious character succeeding me. I may have made many mistakes, but removing Anwar was not one of them. It is, of course, worth wondering who got the final laugh here in this story. In Malaysia's last general election, Mahathir was defeated so badly he registered a single-digit percentage of the vote, and his arch-nemesis Anwar ended up prime minister. Whether you believe Mahathir or not is irrelevant. What I find powerful is witnessing a leader seize control of his own narrative, even years after the fact.
It's a testament to his sheer force of will.
In 2003, Mahathir did the unthinkable and stepped down after 22 years in power. To me, a child of 1990s Kuala Lumpur, the scene of him quitting in tears, seemingly out of nowhere during the UMNO Party General Assembly, was one of the two most defining moments that managed to break through the innocence of childhood. 9/11 was the other.
His memoir ends with him grappling with his legacy and with the new dilemmas facing the nation he built. His chronic dissatisfaction with other people in leadership makes it impossible for him to not speak out and seek to push them out. He places all his hopes on the next leader, only for him to try to replace him shortly after. A Doctor in the House is not neutral, objective history. It's not. It's a political testament. It's biased, it's defensive, it's unapologetic, and at times it's deeply uncomfortable. And that's precisely why it's essential. You don't read this book to get the final word on Malaysian history. You read it to understand the mindset, the complex blend of pragmatism, nationalism, and deep-seated insecurity that shaped that history. You read it to hear, unfiltered, the voice of a leader who truly believed that a nation like a patient could be diagnosed, treated, and sometimes required painful surgery to survive. He gave his country a vision. But more than that, he gave us this, a window into the mind of a man who saw himself not just as a prime minister, but as the nation's doctor-in-chief. Perhaps a new memoir is due here. No doubt a man who lives to 100 spends a lot of time thinking about his stories, and in Mahathir's case, history. In the time since 2011, so much has happened for a man who doggedly refuses to step away or shut his mouth. Mahathir started opposing the government and powerful party he built, then made up with Anwar briefly to lead an opposition full of leaders he had jailed in the past into power to see Malaysia's first democratic change of government. It wouldn't last either. 2 years of hope and optimism soured into factional infighting, and Mahathir, in typical form, attempting shenanigans that only backfired and saw him ejected from his new political party, his status as elder statesman seen as ruined, even in the eyes of those open enough to forgive the stains of his 22 years in power. Today, he continues to write, speak, and criticize, forming new alliances. To what sort of ending, we don't know.
Because the story is, of course, far from over. What do you think is Mahathir's most lasting legacy? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video essay into the mind of a world leader on his 100th birthday, make sure you subscribe to Explaining Malaysia. If you'd like to support the channel, please comment and share this video. We've got more coming. Thanks for watching.